Met. I'm the president for the Rotary Club of Harrisburg, and I invite you to join us for a traditional luncheon meeting, service on a Monday, or Rotary alternate meeting. Everyone's invited, and that means you. Check out our website or Facebook page for more information.
Mr. Unger, would you like to introduce our guest speaker?
Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my honor to introduce Jeff Nichols. You can see in your program his bio and background, a Cliff's Notes version. Jeff came here just over a year ago, a reverse carpetbagger coming from below the Mason-Dixon line back up north, and we appreciate and are excited about that. And he's going to talk to us about the work underway at the National Civil War Museum in Reservoir Park. And I told him as we sat here, family circumstances have led me to be up in Scranton area a little bit more. And my mother's family is from a tiny village called German, Jermyn, just above Scranton. And I was meeting with someone up there. They asked me where I was from, and I said I was from Harrisburg. And typically people will say, right, state capital, beautiful capital, Broad Street Market, Millworks, close to Hershey, all those types of things. Now, this guy said, that's the best Civil War museum I've ever been to. So he came in a bus tour. They did a lot of different things, and that's what resonated with him. It's an asset we have here in the city and in the region, and Jeff's going to tell us more about it. Jeff.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me. And Ryan, you mentioned reverse carpetbagger. Well, it's interesting. When I first arrived in Lynchburg, Virginia, where Poplar Forest, the historic site I worked, is located, the local newspaper Roanoke came and did a story about me. And they took my picture, did the usual thing. And I opened the paper the next day, and there's my photo. Oh, well, that's great. And it said Yankee in charge at Poplar Forest. So you never know, right? Welcome back. Well, again, thank you, Ryan, for the personal invitation, and for all of you for having me here today. I'm planning to talk to you a little bit about the Civil War Museum, something many of you are familiar with here in Lynchburg. Give you a brief history of the museum, very brief for those who may not be aware. A bit of a review of some of the programs, activities, some of the improvements we're making to the facility as well. And then, of course, what's next for our museum as we go through the next 3 to 5 years. That gentleman you're looking at is Thaddeus Stevens, also known as the Great Commoner, a lawyer, businessman, abolitionist, civil rights advocate, and leader, of course, of the civil rights era radical Republicans in the House of Representatives, of course, right here in Pennsylvania. So to get into it a little bit, the Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, of course, was founded by Mayor Stephen Reed. He began to collect artifacts back mostly in the 1990s, and built this wonderful museum building you see on the top right, 66,000 square foot facility that opened to the public 22 years ago in 2001, around this time, actually. And the building, of course, is city owned inside of a city park. And we, the National Civil War Museum, the nonprofit, the 501c3, fellow 501c3 are here, that maintains and operates the facility. To give you a little background, the exhibits were designed also about 22 years ago. They've held up remarkably well. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through the presentation. Right now, we have 6 full-time employees and about 13 part-time employees that manage this organization on a daily basis. Operating budget, just give you a sense of that, is about $1.2 million annually. That fluctuates from time to time, but that's basically where it is. And I mentioned the collection. Mayor Reed certainly put together a wonderful collection. Right now, we have about 35,000 artifacts, both three-dimensional things that you see in that image there, like guns and swords and many other things, clothing, all types of things, and also paper. Lots of diaries, letters, some really interesting pieces, and also photography that are all Civil War era related. And our mission really brings us from the antebellum period, the period before the war, and what led up to the Civil War, through Reconstruction, which is a moving target these days. They used to say 1877, now it's about 1890 something now. So it's a moving target, but it's interesting, gives us more things to talk about. So we have this great collection. 25,000 of them roughly were collected by the city, and we've added an additional 10,000 artifacts since we opened in 2001. And again, people are very generous. The last 2 years have been our best years of collecting ever. We think it's because people were home. locked in their house and they went up their attic and what's this? And so we got a lot of calls about great artifacts. One or two I'll show you in a minute. And also when people come, the story you mentioned, Ryan, someone have a great experience. That's been the case since our very beginning. People really love the experience when they come to the museum. They'll spend 2 or 3 hours walking through the galleries. We have about a 4.5 out of 5 stars on TripAdvisor, 4.7 stars on Google. It's all about the same. And so people do have a great experience. So it was really well done from an interpretive perspective and a collection perspective. I know there's other things around it, but that was really good. And most of the people that come to the museum come from outside of this area. We get repeat visitors, of course, and people who come for programs and special events. Some of you may have been to the building for an event or even toured it, but most of our visitors are tourists coming from outside the region. So a little bit more about a couple of initiatives that we're working on as we move forward. We belong now to a program called Museums for All, which is a way for people who are on food assistance, SNAP benefits, that type of thing, to get free admission. So an adult and up to 4 kids can come tour the museum for free. The normal price is $15 for adults and sort of cascades down. I know the Susquehanna Art Museum and the State Museum also are in this program. So things like that to try to make it as open as we possibly can to folks. And as I mentioned, we're still collecting. This flag is brand new. We got it last week. It's a Garrison flag. So this photo doesn't really do it justice, but it has an interesting story. It's a 34-star Garrison flag, Civil War era flag that was owned by First Sergeant J. David Miller of H Company of the Pennsylvania 122nd Volunteer Infantry. We don't know how he came to own it, but he had it and his family, and they came to us and donated it just recently. He served from August of 1862 and is mustered out in May of 1863. So again, it doesn't look all that big, but when you have one thing that we did, we laid it out on the floor in the auditorium, which you're saying, we do that so we can do an assessment of the artifact, the size of it, the condition, all of those things are recorded. And normally we'll put something next to it, a small object that is recognizable, that you could say what the perspective is. This was so big that we had to use our educator to give you a sense of the size of the flag. So yeah, so we have things both big and small that are very interesting. And this flag, by the way, is in excellent shape for being 160 years old. So we still get artifacts that come into the museum all the time. And we've been doing a lot of programming over the years. I've been here about 1.5 years, and I've always been impressed the depth of programming that's been done at the museum. We have a longstanding program called Lessons in History, which is basically a monthly speaker series on all topics related to the Civil War. We recently did one on Gettysburg, Libby Prison in Richmond, which was the prison for U.S. officers and others in Richmond, which was a horrific place, and even a program on Asian and Pacific Islanders who served in the war. I didn't know there were any, but there were. So it's always interesting to learn new things. Last year, we also did a symposium on U.S. Grant. It was his 200th birthday last year. And so we talked about his life as a general in the U.S. Army and, of course, as president, and focusing on Reconstruction those years after the war. Picture on the lower left is a line of order, a lot of march heading out at Gettysburg. We do walking tours. Last year, we did a program called Ridge to Ridge. It went from Seminary Ridge to the Seminary Ridge to Cemetery Ridge, excuse me. And we had about 50 of our favorite people. We chose May, so it would be a nice cool day. It was 90 degrees, but we made it. And what makes our tours and programs unique when we leave the building is we can bring artifacts with us. So we brought rifles and clothing and swords and other things that were used at Gettysburg, which adds that extra special piece to it. And we did that in partnership with the Seminary Ridge Museum down in Gettysburg. And on the right, you'll see a bit of a darker photo, but we did an encampment too. We have our gala on a Friday night, and that Saturday in September, last September, we held something called Civil War Saturdays, which is a reenactment. Essentially, we get soldiers who come and dress up and do those various things, marching and other pieces. And I'm fortunate enough to have a board member who actually owns his own cannon, Civil War reproduction, and he knows a few people who do it too. So every once in a while, as a museum director, you do get to see and do some cool things. And we'll see if this works. This is a very short 18-second video. Let's see if it'll play here. You'll see it enough. So every once in a while, you get to do cool things. And so that was a night firing that night. No complaints from the neighbors, which was nice, but that's not always the case. So again, we have great programs that we do for all types of folks. And this year, we're also having some really great programming and some new things. So this is our Community Free Day. It's a program that we've done annually now for several years in February to honor Abraham Lincoln's birthday, but also the events in February for African-American history. And this year we had 700 people show up, and you can get a sense, all these photos are from this year, of what people do when they come. We had some folks making quilts. We had some soldiers, new recruits to the U.S. Army right here, mustering in. I don't know if they're age appropriate or not, but they're in. And then people walking through the galleries, really fun. And this box, actually, this woman is reading a book on a man called Henry Box Brown, who was an enslaved person in the South, in Richmond, who actually, with some friends, had himself shipped north in a box to Philadelphia to gain his freedom. Google it, you'll learn more. Fascinating, but that was in the exact size of the box that he did it in. There we go. So as we also know, the Civil War and its legacy is all around us. There's a placard right outside of this building that Abraham Lincoln spoke in this area when he was on his way to be inaugurated. So it's everywhere. And you're looking at two images that became familiar to most of us over the last few years. Image on the left is the unveiling of the statue to Robert E. Lee in Richmond, Virginia in 1890 versus 2022. And of course, now the statue has been removed from Richmond. So that 130-year period has had a lot of history to it and a lot of swing. You could even see Harriet Tubman and the words BLM on the statue. So the legacy of this war surrounds us. And these have brought it really starkly forward over the past decade. And also, frankly, the impact of the events in January 6th in the Capitol in 2001 also brought those ideas fresh to mind. And so as we were thinking about this, it brought us to a point where we really need to begin to speak a little bit more about these concepts and these ideas, put them in perspective. Museums are seen as places where people hear facts and they tend to trust us. Not many organizations in our country are trusted anymore, but museums still are. And so we're trying to tell a fair interpretation of this. The reason I show this image, and if you look, it's a little hard to see, but the first two words in here, in 1619. For those who've been following this, you've heard about the 1619 project from the New York Times back in 2019, a work of a journalist and her team. But we've been talking about 1619 since we opened in 2001, and it's mentioned a number of times. So we've never hidden from the fact that the cause of the war, the root cause of the war, was slavery. And there's a really interesting quote by a great historian named David Blight, just to kind of touch on this for a second. And he wrote that by 1860, there were more millionaires, slaveholders all, living in the lower Mississippi Valley, it's a cotton producing section really of the Deep South, than anywhere else in the United States. In the same year, nearly 4 million American slaves were worth some $3.5 billion in their dollars, in 1860 dollars, making them the largest single financial asset in the entire U.S. economy, worth more than all manufacturing and railroads combined. So if you ever hear the story that the war wasn't about slavery, think of that. Think of the value of this. And I did a quick inflation calculator. I used a couple of them online, so it's a little vague, but that 3.5 billion would be worth about 124 billion today. That's basically the wealth of Jeff Bezos. So that gives you the scope and scale of the size of that, and one of the causes of the war, which we talk about all the time in our museum. So with that, we're starting a new series called Civil Conversations, and this is our first one coming up. Dr. Peniel Joseph, who is a historian, amongst other things, at the University of Texas in Austin. He wrote a book called The Third Reconstruction, where he really goes deeply into the Civil War era reconstructions, or brings it forward. He calls the Civil Rights era the second, and the era we're living through now the third. So he and I will have a nice discussion about his views on this. And this is just the first of what we hope will be many programs, sometimes panel discussions, and we'll go from there. We were also approached recently by the Dinata Navajo dancers who are passing through the area. And so they'll be coming to the museum, and they do a program about William Tecumseh Sherman, of course, the Civil War general, called War Maker, Peacemaker, and that'll be in April. The program's at 10:45, and the program, their dance is at 12:30. And it's a recognition of a tribal treaty with the Lakota tribe in 1868. So we're going to keep doing all of the programs that we normally do, which really are focused on the Civil War, battles, soldiers, generals, all of that, because it's important and very interesting. But we are trying to expand our reach and have new events and concepts. Now, as the 501c3 that operates the museum, part of our agreement with the city is that we also maintain the building. They take care of the grass in the park and the parking lots. We maintain the building. And for any of you who may maintain a building, it's 22 years old and things are beginning to break. So this year alone, we're adding 2 new boilers, replacing the original boilers in the building. Got a wonderful grant to do that. Advantage a nonprofit has is that you can fundraise for those things. And so there's been some generous donors who are helping us. Last year, we had new audio visual equipment put into the galleries. If you've been to the museum, you walk through the gallery spaces, you know there's light shows and video and audio that go through it. That was all analog. And so we updated it to a digital technology. And my favorite story of that, there was a very young guy, early 20s, who was one of the technicians working with the company. And he said, "Do you have any of the material that we can upload?" I said, "Sure." We dug it around and we had 3.5-inch floppy disks. If you remember those, that's how old this is. We handed it to him and he goes, "Oh, I've seen these in books." So that's how old the technology was. So luckily that's updated. Again, very generous donors, individuals and foundations that have helped us. Right now, we're working on a project to update all the lighting. I'm sure I'll tell all of you, electric bills have been a little large lately. Ours doubled over the course of the year. And so putting in new lighting and particularly LEDs will help hopefully drive down that cost. But it's also great for museum collections because LEDs do not give off UV lighting, ultraviolet light, which is a big problem for museums. And also the humidification. So basically, by the time we finish with this, we'll have an all new HVAC system for the museum. So what's next? We have a bunch of projects that we're planning to work on over the next couple of years. As far as our visitation, we were averaging about 30 to 32,000 paid visitors, somewhere north of 40 when you include those who come in for free or come in for rentals. But the paid people coming in was about 30 to 32,000. We're about 26 right now, 26,000. So we're closing in on where we were. Last year was a bit of a hiccup with fuel prices and everything else that we all lived through. But so far this year, we're off to a good start. So we're really hoping that we'll get back to normal or maybe exceed it as we go through the new year. We're also working on a new website. You can see our little online store. There's old Abe going for shopping, where we're going to improve the look and feel and usability of it. Our next symposium will be on abolition and abolitionists, which Pennsylvania played a huge role in. So we're looking at the local story as well as the national and frankly, international story of that. We've applied for several grants with the National Endowment for the Humanities, which is a federal funding agency for nonprofits like ours, to improve the galleries you see. That's part of the interior. That's the memory and meaning section of our galleries. That's the ending of it. We want to explore that story a little bit more with some of the topics I've already mentioned today, but build upon the strengths we have. So we'll hear about that over the summer. You may or may not be aware, but the 250th anniversary of the founding of our little country is coming up. The Declaration of Independence will be 250 years old in 2026. And so we're planning some events for that year as well. And of course, we couldn't do any of this without our friends and supporters, a few who are here in this room, who have been very generous with their time and their money and their expertise over the years. If you do run a business locally, we're also an Educational Improvement Tax Credit Program participant, the EITC funds, where you can help fund students from across Pennsylvania to visit a place like ours for free. So with that, I want to thank everyone for your support of the museum, for having me here today. Thank you for the invitation.